The officers walked through the doors of Grace Covenant Church at 2:17 on a Saturday afternoon in August, and the moment they did, every sound in that sanctuary stopped. Not gradually, not in the slow way that noise fades when something significant enters a room. All at once, the way sound stops when the air itself decides the moment is too large for anything other than silence. There were three of them. Two in uniform and one in a charcoal suit, who moved with the specific authority of someone who did not need a uniform to communicate what he was. They walked down the center aisle of a church dressed in white and gold, past 207 guests in their formal attire, past the flower arrangements that had cost more than 4 months of what I used to earn, past the pew ribbons and the candles and the string quartet that had stopped mid-note and was now sitting with bows raised and instruments frozen. They walked toward the altar, where my husband was standing. My husband, the man I had been married to for 7 years. The man who had told me on a Tuesday morning in March that he was leaving, that he had found something different with someone else, that the marriage was over and that he would be filing for divorce and that he hoped we could be adult about the process. He had said that last part while standing in our kitchen drinking the coffee I had made. Adult about the process. I had been adult about the process for 5 months. I had moved into the apartment my sister offered me. I had engaged an attorney. I had gone to work every morning and done my job and come home in the evenings and sat with the specific weight of a life that had been restructured without your permission and had learned, slowly and with effort, how to carry that weight without being destroyed by it. What I had not been, in those 5 months, was quiet about what I knew. And what I knew is why the officers were walking down that aisle. My name is Naomi Grace Osai Harrington. I am 36 years old. I am a forensic accountant with the federal government, which means I spend my professional life looking at numbers until the numbers tell me what someone did not want anyone to know. I have a master's degree and 12 years of experience and a specific quality of patience that my supervisor describes as the thing that makes me exceptional at my work. The ability to sit with incomplete information for as long as it takes for the incomplete picture to become complete. I had applied that patience to my own marriage. What I found had sent 3 officers down a church aisle on a Saturday afternoon in August. But before I tell you about the officers, I need to take you back. All the way back to the beginning of what was built and what was hidden and what I found when I finally, after 5 months of being adult about the process, decided to look at my own marriage the way I look at the cases that come across my desk. His name was Marcus David Harrington. He was 41 years old and he was, when I met him 9 years ago at a professional conference in Washington, D.C., the kind of man who occupied a room with the specific ease of someone who had always been comfortable in rooms and who had learned, over years of professional success, how to make other people comfortable alongside him. He was a financial consultant. Private clients, wealth management, the kind of work that involves relationships with people who have significant assets and who need someone they trust to manage the movement of those assets. He was good at his job in the visible ways. His clients were loyal, his business grew steadily, his professional reputation was solid. He was also, as I would spend 7 years discovering in fragments and 5 months discovering completely. A man who had built his professional life on a series of financial structures that were not what they appeared to be. I did not know this when we married. I want to say that clearly because the question of what I knew, and when I knew it is the question that everyone who hears this story eventually asks, and the honest answer is that I did not know. Not because I was not paying attention. Because Marcus was very good at the specific skill of presenting one picture while maintaining another, which is, in my professional experience, the primary skill of people who do what he had been doing. I was a forensic accountant and I did not see it. I have sat with that fact many times. What I have arrived at is this. The most effective deceptions are not the ones that hide everything. They are the ones that show you something real, something that is true and that you can verify, in the space where the hidden thing lives. Marcus showed me the real parts of his work and his income and his professional life with enough frequency and enough detail that the spaces between the real parts were filled in by the logic of what I already believed to be true. I believed he was successful and honest and building something real. He was building something. It was not what I believed it was. We married in September 7 years ago. We bought a house in the suburb of Atlanta that I had fallen in love with for reasons I still understand even now. The light in the kitchen in the mornings, the backyard with the oak tree that had been there long enough to be substantial, the neighborhood that was quiet in the specific way that suggests people are living their lives inside their homes rather than performing them outside. The first 4 years were what I understood them to be. I worked. He worked. We built the domestic life of two people with aligned ambitions and compatible rhythms. And if there were moments when the texture of the marriage felt different from what I expected, I filed them as the natural adjustments of two strong personalities learning to share a life, and I moved forward. In year 5, something changed. I am going to describe it the same way I describe it to myself, which is as a quality shift rather than a specific event. A change in the texture of Marcus's professional energy. A quality of management that was different from the ordinary management of a busy business. A specifically directed attention to certain phone calls and certain conversations and certain documents that produced, over time, the particular feeling that something was being contained. I noticed it the way I notice irregularities in financial records, not because one thing was wrong, but because the pattern of the normal things had shifted in a direction that suggested something outside the frame. I did not act on what I noticed. I want to be honest about that. I noticed and I filed it and I continued. Not because I was afraid of what I might find. Because I had not yet built the complete picture and I do not act on incomplete pictures, professionally or personally. It is the quality that makes me good at my work, and it is the quality that, in year 5 of my marriage, kept me in my house and my life while the incomplete picture was becoming complete. The picture became complete in March. Not all at once. In the specific way that pictures complete themselves, one detail at a time, each detail making the previous details more coherent, until the morning arrives when the coherence is total, and what you are looking at is no longer an incomplete picture but a full one. The morning Marcus told me he was leaving, He had been with Vanessa Lee Caldwell for approximately 2 years. I know the specific duration because I found it. In the months after he left, sitting in my sister's apartment, I did what I do professionally. I looked at the numbers. Not from spite. From the specific need of someone who has been presented with an incomplete picture of their own life to understand the complete one before they decide what to do with it. What I found took 4 months. What I found is the reason the officers were in the church. Vanessa Lee Caldwell. She was 29 years old at the time Marcus announced he was leaving. She was an event coordinator. She had been in Marcus's professional orbit, as near as I could reconstruct, for approximately 3 years, meeting him through a client event she had coordinated at which Marcus had been a featured speaker. Their relationship had begun, based on the evidence I assembled, approximately 6 months after that event, which was approximately 18 months before Marcus stood in our kitchen and told me he was leaving. I want to tell you what I found in those 4 months, because the finding is the architecture of what happened at the church, and because the finding required everything my professional training had given me. The first layer was the money. Marcus managed other people's money professionally. He also, I found, had been managing our joint money in a way that I had not fully understood, because the management was designed not to be fully understood. Over approximately 3 years, beginning roughly around the time his relationship with Vanessa began, Marcus had been systematically redirecting funds from our joint investment accounts into a series of separate accounts that were held in the name of a corporate entity called MH Consulting Partners, LLC. MH Consulting Partners, LLC was, on its face, a legitimate business entity. It had a business registration, a business address, a business bank account. What it did not have, as far as I could determine, was any actual clients or any actual consulting work. What it had was a mechanism for receiving money that had, in most cases, originated from our shared financial life. I calculated the total over 3 years. The figure was $387,000. Nearly $400,000 moved from our joint assets into a corporate entity that existed primarily to hold that money outside the visible scope of our marriage. This was the layer that my professional brain recognized immediately. This was marital asset dissipation. This was, in the language of family law, fraudulent transfer. This was the kind of financial architecture that divorcing spouses build when they have decided the divorce is coming before they announce it, when they want to reduce the visible marital estate before the court gets to divide it. But the money was the second most important thing I found. The most important thing was what the money had been used for. I need you to stay with me here. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now before this story goes any further. Hit that notification bell. Because what I am about to tell you is the reason this story exists and the reason the officers walked through those church doors. This channel tells the stories that need to be told, the real ones, the ones built on evidence and patience, and the specific courage of a woman who knew how to look and was not afraid of what the looking would find. Subscribe. Drop your name and your city in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me if this story is finding something in you. Now let me tell you about the second account. Within MH Consulting Partners LLC, the money had not simply accumulated. It had moved. Over 3 years, significant portions of the redirected funds had been transferred to a second entity, a real estate holding company called VLC Properties. VLC, Vanessa Lee Caldwell, her initials, her company. The real estate holding company had been used to purchase a property, a house. A 3-bedroom house in a suburb of Atlanta, not the same suburb where Marcus and I lived, a different one, 22 minutes away, that had been purchased 14 months before Marcus stood in our kitchen and told me he was leaving. He had been building her a house, with our money, for 14 months before he left. I sat with that number, 14 months, for a long time. Long enough to understand it fully. Long enough to stop trying to protect myself from the understanding and simply allow it to be true. He had purchased a house for his girlfriend, using funds transferred from our joint marital accounts through a series of corporate entities designed to obscure the source of the money, 14 months before he announced the end of our marriage. The house was in Vanessa's name. Our money was in Vanessa's house. I called my attorney on a Wednesday morning. Her name was Dr. Christine Ibarra, and she had been practicing family law for 23 years, and she had, in those 23 years, seen a great many things, but she listened to my account of the MH Consulting Partners structure and the VLC Properties transfer with the focused attention of someone who is hearing something that exceeds her expectations. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Naomi, I need to be very direct with you about what you've described. The financial structure you've outlined, the systematic transfer of marital funds through corporate entities to purchase property for a third party, this is not simply marital waste. This may constitute fraud, criminal fraud, and I need to ask you whether you want to pursue this as a civil matter in the divorce or whether you want to involve law enforcement." I told her I needed a few more days. She said she understood. What I needed those few days for was the third thing. The third thing took me another 3 weeks to find, and when I found it, I understood why the financial structure had been built the way it had been built, not simply to divert marital assets, but to create the foundation for something specific. Marcus was planning to marry Vanessa. I found this in the specific way I find most things, by following the money until the money told me where it was going. A series of payments from the MH Consulting Partners account to vendors that I recognized from my own wedding 7 years ago, a catering company, a florist, a venue. The venue was Grace Covenant Church. The date on the venue contract was August the 14th. I was staring at a contract for a wedding ceremony at Grace Covenant Church on August the 14th. Our divorce had been filed in March. It was now June. No final decree had been issued. The divorce was not complete. Marcus Harrington was planning to marry Vanessa Caldwell on August the 14th while still legally married to me. I called Christine immediately. She said, "When I tell you what this means legally, I need you to be sitting down." I was sitting down. I told her so. She said, "What you have described constitutes bigamy. In this state, bigamy is a criminal offense. The intentional contraction of a second marriage, while a first marriage is legally valid, carries criminal penalties, including potential imprisonment." and the financial fraud you've documented, the systematic transfer of marital assets through corporate entities. That is a separate criminal matter that likely involves wire fraud and potentially tax violations, given that MH Consulting Partners appears to have been structured in part to provide accounting cover for the transfers. I said, "What do I need to do?" She said, "You need to share everything you have with law enforcement. The financial documentation, the corporate records, the venue contract. The bigamy case is straightforward if you have the venue contract showing the marriage was planned before the divorce was finalized. The financial fraud case will take longer, but the documentation you've assembled is, Naomi, it is exceptional. I have been doing this for 23 years, and this is exceptionally well documented." I said, "I've had practice." She understood what I meant. I shared everything with law enforcement that week. The assigned detective was a woman named Sergeant Paula Mensah, and she was, as I recognized immediately, someone who understood what she was looking at when she looked at financial documentation. She asked precise questions. She took 3 hours to review what I had assembled. At the end of the review, she looked at me with the specific expression of a professional who has just seen a case built the way a case should be built. She said, "Mrs. Ose Harrington, I want to ask you something." I said, "Yes." She said, "Did you build this documentation specifically for law enforcement, or were you building it for the divorce proceedings?" I said, "I built it because I needed to understand what had been done to me. What it becomes useful for followed from what I found. I didn't start with a legal strategy. I started with the need to see the complete picture." She said, "The complete picture is going to be very useful." She said, "We'll take it from here." I want to tell you about the month between giving the documentation to Sergeant Mensah and the Saturday afternoon in August, because that month is the part of the story that nobody talks about, but that was, for me, the most revealing. I continued going to work. I continued living in my sister's apartment. I continued being adult about the process. But now the process included something that I had not expected, which was the specific quality of waiting that comes when you have done everything you can do, and the rest is out of your hands, and the thing that is out of your hands is moving at the pace of an investigation rather than the pace of your own life. My sister's name is Adiz Osa, and she is 34 years old, and she has been my closest friend since I was 4 years old, and she walked into a room the week before the August 14th date and sat across from me and said, directly and without decoration, "Are you going to go?" I said, "To the church." She said, "Yes." I had been thinking about this question for 3 weeks. Since Sergeant Mensah had told me, without revealing operational details, that the investigation had produced sufficient evidence to act, and that action would occur before or during the ceremony on August the 14th. She had not told me to go to the church. She had told me only that action would occur before or during the ceremony. I had been deciding what I wanted to do with that information. My attorney had not advised me to attend. She had advised me to let the legal and law enforcement processes work without my active involvement in them. She had said, "You have done the work. Let the work do what the work does." She was right about that professionally. She was also talking to a woman who had spent 7 years married to a man who had been building a second life in the spaces of their shared one, and who had spent 5 months assembling the evidence of that building, and 4 months sitting with the complete picture, and who had, in all of that time, said almost nothing publicly about what she knew. Adiz looked at me and said, "You have been quiet for a very long time." I looked back at her. She said, "I am not telling you what to do. I am asking what you want." What I wanted was to be in that room, not to make a scene, not to perform anything, not to interrupt the ceremony with the kind of dramatic confrontation that I had imagined in various forms during the 5 months since Marcus walked out of our kitchen. I wanted to be present when the truth arrived. I had built the truth. I had assembled it piece by piece over 4 months of the kind of patient, careful work that my professional life had prepared me to do. I had handed it to the people with the authority to act on it, and I wanted to be in the room when they did. I told Adiz, "Yes, I'm going." She said, "Then I'm coming with you." That was not a question. We arrived at Grace Covenant Church at 1:45 on a Saturday afternoon in August. 207 guests were already inside or arriving. The parking lot was full. The wedding had been planned with the kind of detail and investment that suggested Vanessa Caldwell had been anticipating it for a long time. Professional photography, a catering team, flowers that I recognized as expensive because I had seen that florist's work before. I knew the florist. It was the same florist Marcus, and I had used 7 years ago. He had used our florist for his second wedding. I sat with that detail for a moment in the car, and then I put it in the specific internal folder where I had been filing details like that for 5 months. The folder labeled things I will feel fully when I have time for it, and I got out of the car. Adiz was beside me. We walked into the church. We sat in the last pew on the left side, which I had chosen because it gave a clear view of the altar and a clear view of both entrance doors and a clear exit path if I needed one. 12 years of assembling evidence has taught me to understand a room before I sit in it. I looked at Marcus at the altar. He was in a white tuxedo. He had chosen white, which I registered without particular emotion as simply the information that it was. He had not seen me. Or if he had seen me, he had not recognized me as a threat to the proceeding, which would have been consistent with his general assessment of me throughout our marriage. He had never, in 7 years, understood what I was capable of finding. Vanessa was not yet visible. She was presumably in the preparation area at the back. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock. At 2:12, when the processional had completed and the officiant had stepped to the front and the congregation had settled into the specific attentive quiet of 200 people preparing to witness something, I was sitting in the last pew with my hands folded in my lap and my breathing even and my mind completely calm. I had done the work. At 2:17, the doors opened. Not the doors Vanessa was supposed to walk through. The side doors, 3 officers, 2 in uniform, 1 in a charcoal suit. And the silence I described at the beginning of this story arrived all at once, the way silence arrives when the air decides the moment is too large for anything other than quiet. The officer in the charcoal suit was not Sergeant Mensa. He was a detective named Raymond Osai, no relation to my family, The name is common, and he moved with the specific economy of motion of someone who has done this before, who knows that efficiency and clarity serve everyone in a room like this better than drama. He walked to the altar. He addressed Marcus by his full name. He said that Marcus David Harrington was being detained for questioning in connection with an investigation into bigamy and financial fraud, and that he was asked to come with the officers voluntarily at this time. He said it clearly and without theater, in the specific measured voice of law enforcement performing a necessary act in a public space. Marcus looked at the detective. Then he looked at the congregation. Then, because he is Marcus, and because the specific habit of a man who has managed perceptions for his entire professional life is not broken in a single moment, he looked for me. He found me in the last pew on the left side. Our eyes met across 207 people, and however many feet of a church that I did not know when he booked it, but that I had found in a venue contract I should never have been reading. I held his gaze for approximately 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Not because I could not hold it, because I had already said everything I needed to say to him, in the documentation, in the 4 months of assembly, in every page that Sergeant Mensa had reviewed and found exceptional. Everything that needed to be communicated to Marcus Harrington had been communicated through the work. There was nothing left that required my eyes to say it. He went with the officers. The church remained in the specific frozen silence of a room where something has just happened that everyone present will remember for a very long time. I sat for another 2 minutes. Then I stood up. Adiz stood beside me. We walked to the side door, the same one the officers had come through, and we left the building. Now let me tell you the twist, because there is one, and it is not what you think it is, and it changes the shape of everything that has come before it. 2 days after the church, on a Monday morning, I received a call from Christine. She said, "Naomi, I need to tell you something that Sergeant Mensa shared with me that you should know." I said, "Tell me." She said, "In the course of executing the arrest warrant and subsequent search of Marcus's office and the MH Consulting Partners records, investigators found documentation of a third financial structure that neither of us had identified in our review." I was quiet. She said, Marcus had been advising 3 of his long-term private clients, individuals with significant personal wealth, and had been directing portions of their investment portfolios into MH Consulting Partners without their knowledge. The money was not coming only from your joint marital accounts. He had been using client funds as well. The total figure across all sources is significantly larger than the $387,000 you documented. I said, "How much larger?" She said, "The preliminary figure is approximately $2,100,000 across 4 years, $2,100,000 over 4 years. I had found the piece of the picture that concerned me, our money, our marriage, our assets. I had built the case that sent the officers to the church. What I had not found, what I had not known to look for, was that my case was a subset of a much larger case. That Marcus had been running the same structure against his own clients at the same time he was running it against me. And that the 3 clients whose money he had moved, who had trusted him with their financial futures, the same way I had trusted him with our shared life, did not yet know. Christine said, "The investigators are going to contact those clients this week. They will be notified of the fraud, and they will have the opportunity to participate in the criminal proceedings and in the civil recovery process." I said, "The house, VLC Properties, the house he bought for Vanessa." Christine said, "The house is subject to asset recovery in both the criminal and civil proceedings. Because the purchase was funded by a combination of marital assets and client funds, both the divorce estate and the client's fraud claims have interests in the property. The recovery process will be administered through the court." I sat with that. She said, "Naomi, there is one more thing." I said, "Tell me." She said, "One of the 3 clients whose funds were moved. His name is Gerald Patterson. He is 81 years old. He has been Marcus's client for 9 years. He trusted Marcus with the management of his entire retirement portfolio. The amount moved from his accounts represents approximately 60% of his total retirement savings." I was quiet for a long time. She said, "I want you to know because this is going to become part of the public record of the case, and I wanted you to hear it from me before you read it somewhere else." I said, "How did Marcus find his clients through MH Consulting?" She said, "The current understanding is that he was directing small amounts initially, amounts that were below the thresholds that would trigger his client's own review processes, and increasing the amounts as the structure remained undetected. The same technique he used with your joint accounts. The same technique, because it was the same structure. The same patience applied to multiple targets simultaneously. The same careful architecture of showing enough of the real picture to fill in the spaces where the hidden thing lived. I had found one dimension of it. The investigators found the rest. Gerald Patterson was 81 years old, and 60% of his retirement savings were in a corporate entity Marcus had built to hold money that did not belong to him. I thought about that for a long time after I hung up with Christine. The criminal proceedings took 11 months. I am not going to take you through every month of them because the legal process is not the story. It is the container for the story. What I will tell you is the result. Marcus pleaded guilty to 3 counts: bigamy, fraudulent transfer of marital assets, and securities fraud in connection with the misappropriation of client funds. The guilty plea was negotiated. His attorneys and the prosecutor worked out an agreement that avoided a trial, which the investigators supported because a trial would have been expensive and the evidence was complete enough that the outcome was not in doubt. He was sentenced to 4 years. He served them. VLC Properties, the house he had bought for Vanessa with money that included our assets and his client's savings, was liquidated as part of the asset recovery. The proceeds were divided between the divorce estate and the client's fraud claims according to a court-administered formula. Gerald Patterson recovered approximately 73% of what had been taken from his retirement accounts, which is not 100%, but is significantly more than he would have recovered if the case had not been as thoroughly documented as it was. Christine told me that the depth of the documentation I had assembled, the MH Consulting records, the transfer history, the VLC Properties connection, was what made the difference in the recovery percentage. The investigators had the structure mapped before they executed the warrant, which meant they could freeze assets before Marcus had the opportunity to move them further. I had built the map. My 12 years of finding what people hid in financial records had built the map. And Gerald Patterson recovered 73% of what he had lost. I have thought about that percentage many times. It is not justice in the complete sense. There is no complete justice for the experience of discovering that someone you trusted with your financial future was treating your retirement savings as a resource for their own enrichment. There is no percentage that fully compensates for that. But 73% is recoverable and livable, and it exists because someone looked at the numbers until the numbers told her everything. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the church. I received a settlement that reflected the full scope of the marital estate, including the value of the assets that had been redirected through MH Consulting Partners, which the court treated as marital property regardless of where Marcus had moved them. The settlement also included the damages for marital waste, which the court calculated based on the full $387,000 that had been diverted and the legal costs that the fraud had required me to incur. I am not going to tell you the specific number because it is not the point. The point is that the house in the Atlanta suburb with the oak tree in the backyard and the light in the kitchen in the mornings is mine. I stayed in it. Not because staying was a statement or a performance or a reclamation in any dramatic sense. Because it is a good house and I chose it for reasons that are still true, and because Marcus's presence in it for 7 years does not change the quality of the morning light in the kitchen. I repainted the living room in November. A warm, deep green that in the afternoon light is the color of something that is growing rather than something that has been preserved. I make coffee in the kitchen every morning, and I sit at the table that has been there since I moved in, and I look at the oak tree in the backyard. The oak tree was there before Marcus. It is there after. Vanessa Caldwell. I want to tell you about Vanessa because the story is not complete without her, and because accuracy requires that she be part of the telling. Vanessa was not charged with anything. She had no knowledge of the financial fraud. The VLC Properties house was purchased in her name, but the evidence established that she had not known the source of the funds. She had believed Marcus when he told her the house was an investment he was making for them, and she had no visibility into the MH Consulting structure that funded it. She had known he was married. She had known we were in divorce proceedings. She had believed, as I learned later, that the divorce was nearly finalized and that the August 14th ceremony was legal. I do not know what Marcus told her about the timeline of our divorce. I can make an educated guess. Vanessa lost the house. She lost the relationship. She lost the version of her future that she had been building toward for 2 years. She was 29 years old, and she had invested 2 years of her life in a man who was simultaneously committing financial fraud against 3 clients, including an 81-year-old with his entire retirement on the line. She sent me a letter 8 weeks after the church. I want to share what she said because I think it belongs in the story. She wrote, "I know I have no right to ask you to believe me, but I did not know what he was doing with the money. I thought the house was a gift. I thought we were building a life. I have lost everything I thought I was building, and I understand that what I lost is nothing compared to what he took from you and from the others. I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I am not the whole of what he did. I read that letter 3 times. Then I wrote back. I told her that I believed her about the money, that the financial structure Marcus had built was specifically designed to be invisible to the people closest to him, and that her not seeing it was not a failure of her intelligence, but a testament to how thoroughly it had been hidden. I told her that what she had done, choosing a man who was married to someone else, was its own kind of harm, and that I was not going to pretend it was not. But that the harm she had done was hers to reckon with separately from the harm Marcus had done, and that I was not going to make her carry his crimes on top of her own mistakes. I told her that I hoped she would be careful with the next thing she built. She wrote back once more. She said, "I will. I promise I will." I kept her letters. Not because they resolved anything. Because they were honest, and because honesty is something I value in proportion to how much I have encountered its absence. I want to tell you the broader thing now. The thing that is bigger than one marriage and one fraudulent financial structure and one Saturday afternoon in August when 3 officers walked down a church aisle. There is a specific category of professional knowledge that women are sometimes encouraged, subtly and not so subtly, to keep separate from their personal lives. The message takes different forms in different contexts, but the underlying content is usually this: your professional capabilities are for work, and the application of those capabilities to your personal relationships makes you something suspicious, paranoid, cold, incapable of trust. I am a forensic accountant. For 12 years, I have been paid to look at what people hide in financial records. I am good at this. I have found things that other people missed. I have built cases that were built correctly, and that produced just outcomes. And for 7 years, I applied the professional habit of accepting sufficient explanations in my personal life, because applying my professional scrutiny to my own marriage felt like a violation of the trust that marriage requires. I want to say something very specific about that. Trust and attention are not opposites. You can trust someone and still pay attention to whether the things they tell you are consistent with the things they do. You can love someone and still notice when the pattern of the normal things shifts in a direction that suggests something outside the frame. You can be in a fully committed relationship and still maintain the professional quality of not accepting incomplete pictures as complete ones. I am not saying that everyone should forensically audit their spouse. I am saying that the instincts you have developed professionally are not required to go dormant in your personal life, and that the specific dismissal of those instincts in the personal sphere, the cultural pressure to not look too closely at the person you love, is sometimes exploited by people who understand that the looking would find them. Marcus exploited it. He understood that I was capable of finding what he had built. He also understood that the social norms of marriage had produced in me a habitual courtesy of not looking. He relied on that courtesy for 7 years. I stopped extending it in March. And the result of stopping was Gerald Patterson recovering 73% of his retirement savings. Was $350,000 and $87,000 returned to the marital estate. Was a man who had been running a financial fraud against people who trusted him, facing the full accounting of what he had done. I stopped extending a courtesy he had never deserved. And the numbers told the truth. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now. This channel is built for this story. For every woman who has been told that her professional capabilities are too much to bring to her personal life. For every person who has been sitting with an incomplete picture of their own life and has been told that looking more closely is the problem rather than the solution. Subscribe, hit the bell, drop your name and your city in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me if you are a Naomi. Tell me if you know what it is to spend years extending a courtesy that was never deserved. Drop a heart if you believe that attention and trust are not opposites. Drop a heart if you have ever looked until the numbers told you the truth. Drop a heart if you have ever been adult about a process that was anything but. Drop a heart for Gerald Patterson, who recovered 73%. Drop a heart for Adiz, who asked the right question and got in the car. Drop a heart for Sergeant Mensah, who called the documentation exceptional and meant it. Drop a heart for the oak tree in the backyard that was there before Marcus and is there after. Drop a heart for the green kitchen that is growing rather than preserved. This is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you. Next week on Black Diamonds, a woman who discovered that the nonprofit her husband had founded in her name, using her name, her signature, her professional credentials as founding board chair, had been generating income for 6 years that she had never seen. What the IRS found when they traced the nonprofit's filing history. What her attorney found when she requested the board minutes. And what was in the financial statements that the organization had never shared with the woman whose name was on the founding documents. That story is coming. Make sure your notifications are on, because what was in those board minutes changes everything about what happened next. Until then, this is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you.